May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be ever pleasing in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So as many of you know, in college, I used to work in the theater department. I was employed by the director. It was a one-man theater department, and he was allowed to hire 3 paid student assistants. So for 3.5 years, I was one of those assistants. And one of the first problems I noticed when I got to the Teal College theater department was when we were doing A Midsummer Night's Dream. Our director, Bill, had a relationship with a costume shop in Pittsburgh, or on the other side of the state. And he would always rent from this woman, paying about $100 to $150 per costume. That's a normal rate. Because sometimes you don't want to spend the time building a whole costume, so you just rent it. When we were doing A Midsummer Night's Dream, he rented about 20 costumes for that show. But when they arrived, he didn't like them. So we only ended up using like 6 of them. And I was like, well, maybe this is a one-time thing. The other ones just sat on the rack and we wasted the money. Then we went to do the importance of being earnest. And Bill went down to the costume store. He met with the owner, who he'd been a customer of like 15 years now. 15 years of good business. And he explained exactly what he wanted for this 1890s Victorian period play. And she said, great, we can do this. We have the stock, it'll be great. And he sent colors that he wanted, and everything was going to be perfect. Now the costumes, when you rent costumes, don't come until a week before the show. So a week before the show, we get the boxes, and we're excited to uncrate them and see what these costumes are going to be. Oh no. She had sent stuff from the 1930s, even though the play's set in the 1890s, which may not sound like it's a big deal, but for us, it was a huge deal. The costumes were in garish colors like orange and blue, when we had asked for purples, like just completely not what we asked for. Completely not what Bill had discussed with this woman. Bill took the time to tear apart some of them and reassemble them the way he wanted, and then put them back to the original way before we sent them home. He also ran out and rented another 4 tuxes for the lead guys. We ended up spending so much more money than we needed to. And it was after that show that I approached Bill and said, why are we still renting from this company? There are costume companies across the nation, and they can ship the costumes. There has to be a better vendor than this one we're using. And he went, well, this is who we've always gone to. This is how we've always done it. I've been committed to this woman for 15 years. And I said, and in that 15 years, what has she given you? Half the time you're stuck a week before the show trying to throw together a whole new costume scheme because she didn't send what was asked for or what was expected. So I said, would you let me explore some other costume companies? We don't have to do it, just let me research. And he's like, I think it's time. It is time, Bill. I find a costume company in Florida. I don't remember the name right now. And I go to Bill, because we're starting to do Dangerous Liaisons now, which is set in 1790 in France. So you're talking panniers, damask fabric, very heavy draperies type stuff. And we need the whole show rented. There's no way we're building any of these costumes on our own. We want it all to have a look. We want to rent a whole set. And I say, Bill, she can't do this. The Pittsburgh lady cannot touch this. He's like, I think we're going to try a different company. I said, well, why don't we try this company in Florida? And he went, no. And I said, what's wrong with it? He's like, that's the company we went to before we went to the company in Pittsburgh. And I was like, he's like, we left that company because the woman in Pittsburgh left the Florida company to found her Pittsburgh company, and Bill followed her. It's a small world. But I called anyway, because Bill's like, we need to change. So I called, and I was immediately put through to the owner of the company, because I think she was still holding a grudge that Teal College had left her 15 years ago. We talked. We sent exactly what we wanted, and they sent back pictures of what we were going to get, which we never got before. And when the week before the show came and we unboxed the costumes, they were gorgeous. I felt like I stepped out of a painting when I was wearing these things. luxe fabrics, everything fit. There wasn't much adjustments to be made. We had to add a shawl to a few things, but nothing huge. And from then on, Bill used that company. I tell this rather long story, though, because it's basically what the disciples are going through in our gospel today. Think about it. The disciples had spent all their time, we've heard all the stories of them being with Jesus, experiencing these healings and these teachings. They're learning and they're growing and they're seeing all these miraculous things. They are walking with God on earth. And then that person goes away. God is killed and resurrected, but it's only showing up every now and then. So what are the disciples doing when God isn't there? Are they out teaching and healing and doing the work of Jesus? Are they out evangelizing and living into the Great Commission? They're fishing. They went back to the thing they always did. Instead of going out and doing what they're supposed to be doing, they reverted back to what they knew. They reverted back to their traditional way. They reverted back to what they were comfortable with. Because that's the way they always did it. But you would think when you've been touched by God, when you've been so close to the divine, that maybe that would cause a shift and that would cause a change. And even when they finally go fishing, they don't catch anything. And it takes Jesus saying, maybe you need to throw the net on the other side. Maybe you need to take the net on the side you don't usually go on, and something might happen. Much like Bill needed to change costume companies, so too the disciples needed to try things in a new way. And it reminds us today that we are always being called into new ways of doing things. And the danger of falling back into that same system, that same tradition, that same thing over and over again when we confront a problem. And this is a message that certainly needs to be said to the wider church and to our church. We can talk about this at a church level and how churches revert back to their tradition and circle up and all that, but you have heard that all before, because I've preached about it before already. And when I was praying and meditating on this passage, I think more today we also need to hear that this applies to our personal lives as well. This applies to the challenges we face every day. This applies to the things that we confront. And do we revert back to the old way? Or do we try something new? What is burdening us today? What are we holding on to today? What do we keep doing even though we know it doesn't work? Even though we know that relationship isn't good for us? Even when we know that person won't help us the way we expect? Even when we know that this thing's going to go wrong, but we still keep doing it? And it doesn't feed our soul. It doesn't feed our faith. It doesn't feed our love of God. But we keep doing it because that's the way we've always done it. What do we do in those situations? We have to remember that we can throw the net to the other side. We have to remember that we can call a new costume company, that we can try new things in our lives. And sometimes that'll be hard. Sometimes it might bring out some uncomfortable truths. Sometimes we might have to confront someone. But if we don't try something new, it's just going to keep burdening us again and again and again. So I encourage you to think about what is pulling you down. Think about what you keep repeating just because that's the way we've always done it, and to then look at it again with a little more critical eye. Is this deepening my faith? Is this bringing me closer to God? Is this making me happy? And if it's not, maybe it's time to throw the net in a different direction.